Brothers, please pay close attention to what I'll share in this video, because what's happening at the beginning of this year, 2026, is something I haven't seen before. In the world of entertainment, especially in the Christian community, you probably remember how Christian movies used to be, right? They were low-budget films. The stories were very weak, usually just retelling what was in the Bible, and that's when they weren't telling different things, right? Unfortunately, we end up being very skeptical, very suspicious, because some companies try to make biblical movies in the past, and they made mistakes. At several moments, anyone who read the Bible and looked at the screen could tell that something was wrong. I remember that movie I even watched in the theater with my family. The movie is called Exodus, Gods and Kings. Do you remember that movie? The film aimed to tell Moses' story, but portrays God as very distant. A God as if he were just an idea, like a thought in Moses' mind, and not a God who speaks, who commands, who has his own will, a God who reveals himself, just as it is in the Bible, right? What would it cost them to make a movie based on the Bible? Since there are millions of Christians spread across the face of the earth, and for sure, it's a loyal audience, an audience that consumes when something is really relevant. Besides that, we notice that miracles are treated as if they were natural phenomena. You know, that's what science tries to bring to our days, right? They want to show, for example, that the parting of the Red Sea was just a wind that happened at that exact moment. But what they don't explain is how that wind happened exactly when the Hebrew people were there, in front of the sea, and also the wind stopped when the sea closed, right after the people had already crossed. So, all the time they want to discredit the Bible, and that's very sad. We often realize the enemy can be behind this kind of movie, and that's not an exaggeration. There is a battle happening right now in the heavenly realm, and few people realize this. After all, the entertainment industry is the best way to deceive people. It's the best way to manipulate the entire population because it deals with audiovisuals. It stirs our emotions, our feelings, or maybe someone made a movie, but with their own interpretation or based on what they believed in their personal interpretation of the Bible. An example of this is that movie Noah. Remember it? And I, personally, have watched it about 3 times because I really like it. But I know it caused a lot of controversy at the time. For example, the director brought in stories and elements that aren't in the Bible, but were inspired by the Book of Enoch. So you notice those stone beings there, called Watchers, who don't appear in the biblical text. Besides that, Noah is portrayed as someone confused, often uneducated, rough, right? Someone who takes extreme actions, not in the way God wants, but based on the experiences he had. Of course, brothers, the movie shows a new perspective, right? Because we have that idea of Noah's Ark, as if everything was nice and neat. Then the rainbow comes, and everything is perfect. But brothers, the truth is, it was rough. Stop and think about it. Humanity was wiped out. Not just people, but animals, nature. Everything was devastated, so the new world could begin, and God could restart humanity. So, the movie portrays this realistic aspect very faithfully, and there was also another movie where they tried to portray the life of Jesus. The movie's called The Last Temptation of Christ, brothers. This movie caused a lot of outrage because it shows Jesus imagining an ordinary life with marriage and sexual desires. So, for those who truly believe in the gospel, that's not a small detail, not at all. That harms the whole story because it directly affects the holiness of Christ and the foundation of our Christian faith, you know? So, that's why, many times, this ends up upsetting people. It makes them feel hesitant. But thank God, this scenario is changing because Christian companies are taking on their role, taking their place. And what used to be an obstacle, a difficulty, which was financial resources, thank God, people are supporting. Like in the case of The Chosen, which was completely funded by people's donations. And with that, they raised a lot of money. They definitely spent a lot and keep spending. But this opened doors for them to make movies at a Hollywood level, so to speak, right? So today I want to quickly talk about the movie David, A King is Born. This movie that's in theaters isn't just the kind of movie you go to just to show some moral support, you know? Oh, I'm going there because it's a Christian movie, and Christian movies should lead the box office, should surpass worldly movies. But no, brothers, this movie surprised me because it shows David's life in a very real way, but not by telling, for example, about David's adult phase, like what happened in House of David, which is David's house, that fantastic series. But here in this movie, we notice that they talk about David when he lived in anonymity, taking care of the sheep. And the first thing we notice is that they show David in his essence, because David is not that giant. You know, that warrior. No. Brothers, he was a simple shepherd, took care of the sheep, smelled like animals. You know, he was a boy that nobody thought much of. In fact, when the prophet Samuel went to the house of his father, Jesse, to anoint the future king of Israel, not even the prophet believed that David could be the future king of Israel. Not his father, not his brothers. Nobody thought much of that boy. But brothers, God himself told the prophet Samuel, "Do not pay attention to appearance, because I see the heart. Man only sees the outside, only the appearance." We can see in this movie that they got it right. For those who don't know,
A empresa responsável foi a Angel Studio.
she is responsible for the series The Chosen, for that wonderful movie called Sound of Freedom. I watched it. I was moved. And I believe everyone should watch that movie. And what I find most interesting is that this company makes a point of saying, look, we are Christians. We have a purpose to spread the message of the gospel from the Bible. And they are not ashamed of it, brothers. And it has worked. I'll show you here. The numbers don't lie, right? Why? They invested more than 60 million reais in this David movie, and they're already seeing results, thank God. More than 20 million reais. They already recovered it just in the first weekend, surpassing that SpongeBob cartoon. Brothers, people saw the movie mainly due to limited choices, not because they truly enjoyed it. Personally, I fell in love with the visuals. I was impressed to see the richness of detail in the clothes. You notice that the enemy peoples had one type of clothing, and the people of Israel had different clothes. They had a different way of living and communicating, always paying attention to every detail. And one thing you'll notice is that there was a purpose for them to portray David at that stage, right? In anonymity. And you'll notice that they showed a lot. The childish side, the child side of David. Because that's where, brothers, that's where our character is formed. It's in our childhood that things happen, especially at the foundation of our lives. And that's why we, as parents, have this responsibility to raise our children in the best way possible, in the ways of the Lord, because later it's no use complaining. We need to teach them from the very beginning, right? So, the movie, it shows something very simple, that if you want to be approved by God in public, you must first be approved in private. Nowadays, that's the time we live in, right? Of social media, where everything has to be exposed so we can get praise and approval from people. But brothers, this movie highlights a detail we've lost over time. We don't need anyone's applause. We don't need recognition from people. Above all, we need God to validate our testimony. Amen. So I won't tell you here, of course. Go watch the movie. I see we live in a time when people don't want to go through the process. And it's clear in David's life that he went through all these processes, you know? In fact, our thinking is very fast-paced, brothers. We want to watch everything at double speed, triple speed, and then what happens? We forget life is a process. Remember the movie Click? I watched it a long time ago, and it shows exactly that. The guy, he had a remote control, and he would skip the boring parts of life, those processes, right, that nobody wants to go through. So he would skip all those parts. But then we realize in the movie that it didn't work out, because life is made of processes, and there's no point in trying to skip steps. So, one thing I also noticed is that Davy, he wasn't just a musician, right? If you expect the movie to be musical throughout, it won't be. There are some songs, though.
Nada parecido com aquele filme.
Do you remember Prince of Egypt? Wow. For me, it's number one. The best Christian children's movie I've ever seen. Of course, there are some things there that change a little, right? Related to the Bible, but it's to make it easier for people to understand, even for those who aren't Christian. The person doesn't need to know the details, you know? There are things that don't need to be said. Even in this movie about David, we notice the violent side, because David was a warrior. You agree?
Imagine mostrando o lado violento.
Blood everywhere. Kids shouldn't see this. Everything has its time. So, it's important to know this movie isn't a musical, but at the same time, it's a movie that shows that praise is a weapon of war, and that's what I found so interesting. Because David was a man who played music, and the demon would leave the king. Saul, for example, David understood that music wasn't just musical notes, but it was a weapon of war. That side was explained in detail, and I found it very interesting. But what I want to tell you is this. This movie came to change things and put us on the level, on the standard of a Hollywood movie. This, God willing, will open many doors so that people around the world, people who don't know the gospel, can get to know the stories of the Bible, which are so exciting, so rich in detail, so full of teachings and lessons. Isn't it true then that you could be praying for God to move this kind of film forward? It's clear that the company wants to bring biblical values to this society that is so degrading. And if you, as a father or mother, you know the danger of this agenda that has been bringing gender ideology, right? In the movies, by the way. I hope that from now on, only good movies will come out. Christian movies, right? Of course they won't confuse our children's minds, brothers. I hope you enjoyed these comments I made here. I'm not going to say much. I'm holding myself back from giving too many details, because otherwise you might not like it if I reveal important details about the movie here. But know that it's not just that battle between David and the giant Goliath. There's much more behind this movie. And what if you watch it later? Leave your comment here sharing a point of view that I didn't mention and that you think is interesting to show people. Alright. I'm Pastor Antonio Jr. If you like this video, share it with as many people as possible and subscribe to my channel, because every day I will say a prayer in the morning and a prayer at night for your life, alright? God bless you. A big hug.